Tonight we're going to continue to build on what we looked at last week, and I hope you've all got this sheet. Mine's all marked up, I guess. Maybe if I grab that one. So we're working on this sheet here, building on the things which we found there in Daniel chapter 11, the ideas that we drew out, the key phrases that were there. We want to take some of those phrases, see how they're applying to what's going on in the world, to realise that this is a prophecy that applies to the world we're living in right now. Up there on the screen you can see a graphic or an image that has a whole bunch of different symbols and icons, I guess. Lots of symbols. And I guess it's a good summary of the fact that there is so many different influences, priorities and interests in what's going on in the Ukraine area in itself. I mean, it's 45 million people. Yes, it's had an aeroplane get bombed down, but look at it from the bigger perspective of what's going on, and there's an awful lot of interests that are being played out over this tiny little, in perspective to the overall world, territory of land. So building on last week, as we said, a picture says 1,000 words. We want to have a look at how this process is beginning. It's already underway. We have this statement here that the taking of Crimea is old news, and it is in perspective. It's months old. But let's remember the prophecy of Daniel chapter 11 verse 40 covers how many years? The whole chapter of Daniel 11 is 2,500 years. Verse 40 covers how many years? Potentially.
100.
Coming up to 100. Okay. Remember we talked about last week the British Empire that was pushing up at the Ottoman Empire. We're going to come back to that. That was early this century. Okay. Potentially that verse is covering a period of about 100 years. So sometimes we need to slow the expectation down. God's got a much bigger plan. He's been working on this plan for 6,000 years. We've only got 60, maybe 70, some of us 80 years of life. Okay, so different perspective there that we work on. Now, I also need to be very careful tonight to say we are not prophets. We cannot make statements about what will happen other than to read the Bible and try to see what the Bible says occurring in the world. I'm not trying to say what will happen. We're trying to simply look at what's occurring and see how it matches with the Bible. Why? It gives us reassurance. It helps us know that God's still in control of the world. It gives us something to be able to hold on to, that if this prophecy is being fulfilled, we will get to verse 45 at the beginning of that new and better world that God is going to introduce. And that's what we're looking forward to. So again, I reiterate that it's important. Tonight we're looking at how the stage has been set and that things are already in motion. Now I put up a picture which is in our own local paper. The West Australian had this graphic on Sunday, June 29, 2014. Sunday Times then. There you go. Sorry, I thought it was the West. But that's right, but being Sunday, that's what it has to be. Now I just realised when I saw Perth Now. But have a look at the focus of what a Perth paper says are the issues of the world. I mean, what's going on over this side of the world? All the focus is really predominantly in and around the Middle East, and that was before the Israeli invasion. That's the section that we're talking about when we talk about Daniel chapter 11. These nations in the red are all the nations that we're going to talk about tonight and more. We're talking about Ukraine. We're talking about all these nations in here. We're talking about Egypt. We're talking about Libya. We're talking about Ethiopia. All right? Sometimes the news doesn't filter through to tiny little Perth. But there's a lot going on in the world. Well, that picture zooms in a little bit better. Let's try and grasp the geography of the area. This is Russia. Okay? Coming down here into the Ukraine area, here's the Crimea. down into Turkey. Here you've got your Syria and Iran, down Lebanon, Israel, down into Egypt, all critical areas that are part of this invasion prophesied by Daniel chapter 11. All right, last week we mentioned the Ottoman Empire. Travis referred to it. We recall those verses at the start of Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, where it talks about, at the time of the end, shall the king of the south push at him. So we were talking about the king that was occupying this territory. Remember, we talked about the occupying force because it was in contrast to the fact that Egypt would be an independent country later. You might recall that from last week. It would push up at this Ottoman Empire and it shrunk right back down to a tiny little area up here in Turkey, didn't it? By the end of the World War, it was a very small empire. I've left that map up though, because I want you to take notice of the fact that the Ottoman Empire went right up around the Black Sea and into the Ukraine, into Crimea. Remember that map that we just looked at that talked about all the conflict in these nations? Same map, same areas. Okay? So we said that we were at this point here of the break, which Travis has emphasised, which is where Ezekiel 38, 39 fits in. 37 as well, 38, 39. We're looking for the king of the north that's going to come against him, the Ottoman Empire, when the king of the north will come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, with horsemen and many ships. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're expecting to see is the next stage. And that's what we're suggesting to is beginning to occur with this invasion, first of all into the Crimea, but also now the focus has turned to this eastern side of Ukraine. I think sometimes we can get a little bit too hung up on just borders. Let's look at the general areas of land. Borders move over times, over thousands of years. Let's look at the general areas of land that are being covered. So we're looking for the king of the north who's going to occupy these territories. Remember how we talked about the king of the south wasn't Egypt, even though it was coming up from Egypt? Well, this time we've got to emphasise the fact that the king of the north is highly likely an occupying force. I'm not going to go into the detail of how to come to that. We need to put all those other prophecies which Travis has talked about in that comparison sheet together to come to that understanding and that appreciation. But we're talking about a nation that's come and occupied the Crimea, who's claiming that they should be able to have part of the Ukraine. What's next? Ezekiel 38 talks about a number of nations. And this is where I guess we need to come to our understanding of why we come to the conclusion that it's Russia. Turn with us to Ezekiel chapter 38 and we'll have a look at the first few verses of that chapter. I've put a different translation up there from what you might have in front of you. It simply helps with a slightly better interpretation of the names. Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 2, I need to go through this quickly just to list off the names. It says, Son of man, this is God talking to Ezekiel. Ezekiel, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Behold, I'm against you, Gog, Rosh, Meshech, Tubal. Okay? Where are those nations? Well, this map generally, as you can see, the nations of Ezekiel chapter 38 talks about Tubal, Meshech, Rosh of the land of Magog. Okay? We don't have time to go through all the proofs of it. Pick up some simple Bible dictionaries and you will be able to follow through and see that. A simple search on Google will give you the answers to show you that this is the area of those nations. So when we align the prophecies, like Travis said, about all these common phraseology, language that's used, particularly in Ezekiel 38, particularly in Daniel chapter 11, into Joel, into Revelation, we're able to put together a picture with different perspectives, and that's important. Anything that happens in history has different perspectives that contributes to it. You have the person that was standing over there looking at it from their perspective. You have the person who was standing here alongside the incident, saw it from their perspective. Well, the prophets are speaking to us from all different perspectives, and so they add different details, but they're talking about the same events. They're adding bits of information, and you piece it all together and you come to a much fuller understanding of what we're talking about. So Ezekiel 38 is talking about an invasion where God is going to turn this group of nations, group of peoples, we would call it all in that area of Russia, Ukraine, and down towards the area of Turkey. God's going to turn it about, put hooks into its jaws and bring it forth. Now, Travis talked about that being almost a statement which says it's against the will of the individual. To have a hook in your jaw means you're being dragged in a general direction. You're going to come down with an army, with horses, with horsemen, all of the clothed armour, great company, with buckler, shield and handling sword. And again, you've got the Old English language which goes with it. Okay? We're dealing with old names, ancient names. And I put this slide up here purely to communicate that these old names are still recognised. This is a picture from when Russia invaded the Crimea. Written on a gate in Russian is the phrase Rus. Russia, do not, or Russian, do not surrender. That's what's written on that gate. Now you can follow those things back through history and see that these old names are still understood and known today. Okay? We don't have time to spend and to focus on all of that. That's the old news. We've got to move on and see what's happening in the world. Why is Ukraine so important to Russia? Why is it so focused on Russia? Why is Russia so focused on the Ukraine?
I'm going to suggest that it wants...
I should come back rather than...
wants the sea frontage for its navy.
Okay, wants sea frontage for its navy. That's one option. Yep. Any other suggestions?
They used to control Kiev in history.
Historical?
Kiev Rus.
Okay, absolutely. Kiev Rus. Absolutely. Any other reasons? Religion's at the bottom of everything. So that's in there as well. I'm going to suggest there's one more, and it's gas. Very important income stream for Russia. All right. Here's the Guardian newspaper. Simply, I'm using headlines to communicate what we expect and what we see. Turn to take out your piece of paper. Daniel chapter 11 and verse 40. It says that this king of the north is going to come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and with... And last week we made notice of took notice of the fact that it said many ships. So just as a comment was made, the access to waterways are important. Navy's important. There's a huge shipbuilding maintenance site in the Crimea, right there in the Black Sea. Here's a phrase, all right? Here's a whole article. We could go through this whole article and see Russia's perspective on Crimea as being a Navy stronghold. But I just want to pick on one phrase and show you some of the history of what's been going on. Because God doesn't work in months. He works in events and the stage is being set. Okay? In 2008, the Ukrainians said that they would not renew the lease on the naval base in Crimea when it expired in 2017. Okay? Try and grasp that, a few years ago. But they wouldn't renew the lease. It's something you need to act on when it's an important Navy base. It's not something you can just leave until the year before. But the Ukrainians buckled under the pressure of a gas price hike. And in 2010, extended the Russian Navy's lease until 2042. Shows some of the history of what's going on behind the scenes, doesn't it? Okay, so they've been arguing about it. They're playing political games between themselves. Give us the base, we up the price on the gas. We know the whole issue that was in the Ukraine was over unpaid gas dues, wasn't it? So they turned off some of the gas a month and a bit ago. The games continue. This is the way the nations are working to be able to get their outcomes. Russia in particular has its objectives. The Navy is a very important part. Why? Because from the Black Sea they then have access down into the Mediterranean. That's exactly where this invasion is going in the direction of, isn't it? We'll come back to that in a sec. But notice the Bible particularly said with many ships. I'm going to come back to that idea again in a sec. Let's just focus though on these gas pipelines for a second. Why is gas so important? Well, lots of gas comes in at all these red arrows and it goes out to Europe at all these blue arrows. A quarter of Europe's gas goes via the Ukraine. Okay?
When you say via, it all comes from there?
No, it comes from Russia. Comes from Russia and goes through these pipelines to different states, nations in Europe. Okay? That alone makes it very important to Russia that they have their feeders of their big income streams protected. Okay? Just put it into perspective for you. Here's a statement from the International New York Times. Okay, May 17. So yes, it's 2 months old, but nothing's changed. Okay? When Russia seized Crimea in March, it acquired not just the Crimean landmass, but also a maritime zone more than 3 times the size of the Crimean Peninsula, with the rights to underwater resources potentially worth trillions of dollars. The Russians are interested in the gas. Does anyone recall about a month and a half ago, they made a deal with another big emerging economy of the world? China. Does anyone know the size of the deal? 400 billion. The analysis of that deal was it was good politically, it was bad economically. They sold it too cheap. They also don't have enough gas to supply it. That's important to them. Russia portrayed the takeover as reclaiming its rightful territory, drawing no attention to the oil and the gas that is really behind the scenes. We could go on, we can read it all. You're welcome to go have a look online at these articles and understand more of it for yourself.
So trillion is 1,000 billion, yeah?
Yeah, American billion is different to our billion and trillion, and I'm not going to get into that argument because I'm assuming they're talking American and we're talking...
Some it's billion.
Yeah.
It's 1,000 billion.
Either way, it's a very, very big number.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
They said the first trillionaire in the world would be Bill Gates. That's what they once said.
We're hoping.
So,
Yeah.
you know.
Here, pictorially, this is what's happening, okay? Here you've got Russia. Here you've got the Ukraine area here. Down here is the Crimea Peninsula. Now, previously, Russia had this purple part. That was the sea that Russia had. Now, they had been arguing for about 5 years over trying to extend these borders because they know what's under that water. Having taken the Crimea, Russia now has all of that section. Okay? So let's not just focus on the fact that it is a navy port, it's also more gas to fund their government. So there's lots of things that go behind the scenes. Ezekiel 38 talks about the fact that Russia will make the invasion what for? Does anyone remember what Ezekiel 38 said? to take a spoil, to take a prey. So they're motivated by financial gain. Okay? All right. Let's keep looking at this though, because Daniel chapter 11 says that the king of the north shall come against him with a whirlwind, the chariots, horsemen, many ships. He will enter into the countries, plural. We noted that last week, that it's talking about multiple countries. This is not an invasion just of one country. There is going to be multiple countries before he gets down here to the glorious land or the Holy Land or Israel. So we're up here at the moment. This is what's occurred. Well, this is what's occurred. They're currently fighting over this part, the eastern side of Ukraine. Well, if we're coming from this north and we're coming south, what nations do we expect, or countries do we expect to be involved in a Russian invasion which overflows and passes over? Overflow and pass over.
Turkey?
Turkey. Absolutely. What about this country here? Because the choice is either you come down over the water to Turkey, or you come down over the land through Georgia through Turkey.
They basically took that a couple of years back anyway.
That's interesting. What happened in 2008?
It took over 24 hours.
Within 24 hours, they'd taken control of a large portion of Georgia. Yes, they gave it back. Part of it. Forces are still there. Are they waiting just to finish the job off later? Who knows? Now, we're going to come back to those countries. We're going to talk about Armenia, which is sandwiched just here in the middle. We might talk about Azerbaijan in a minute as well. What's going on down here? Here we have, goes out into that area, Iran. Actually, I thought that would have gone away. It doesn't. So we've got Iran down here. We've got Iraq here, and we've got Syria. What have we got here?
A mess.
A mess? Absolutely. We've got a group called ISIS, or IS now, claiming to be the old Ottoman Empire. Now the king of the north is going to push against him. Remember the map of the Ottoman Empire? Yes, it receded to up here, but it had its roots, didn't it, down into here as well? Is that ironic? Or is that the Bible knowing precisely what's going to happen in times? And so language is very carefully used. Coming down then through into the Israel area and down into Egypt. All right, well, let's have a look at some of those nations and what's going on. Here's some headlines. Monday, April 24th. Turkey is vulnerable to rising Russian power in the Black Sea. So we're talking Navy again. And we're talking the effect that it has on Turkey's border. With the annex, and this is a quote, all these blue boxes are simply quotes from whatever website headline it is that we're talking about. With the annexation of Crimea, Turkey faces a stronger and bolder Russian naval power in the Black Sea. In the past, they only had a very small portion of the waterways access. With the Crimea, it is much greater. They've got a lot more launching area. They've got a whole base there now. A resurgent Russia may be tempted to exploit its temporary naval dominance to alter current Black Sea energy exploitation, i.e. the gas we just talked about, and transportation arrangements more in its favour and to the detriment of Turkey and its partners in the Caucasus. Russia now possesses the Ukrainian Navy's submarine and several, if not most, of their surface combatants. Okay? This website doesn't know what the Bible says is going to happen. It doesn't know that Russia is going to actually invade, but it certainly understands that Russia can exploit Turkey. If we're not talking about invading though, because remember the language of Daniel chapter 11 is overflowing and passing over, maybe we're talking about alliances. Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan create a Eurasian Economic Union. The treaty was signed in May this year. It's been, I think, 3 years in the workings, and it's not there, the actual detail on it. But May 29th, 2014 is when it was signed. It was signed by Russian, Belarus and Kazakhstan presidents. Okay? They talked about, and they did it in an extended meeting with the participation of heads of other observing states, including Armenia, and they talked about Azerbaijan as a potential option, but longer term. Have a look at that on a map. This is just a headline. It's not my words, it's a headline that was from the paper. But have a look at that map. In the red, we see the Eurasian Economic Union. In contrast to the blue, we see the EU. It sort of puts things in a slightly different perspective, doesn't it? We sometimes think the EU is the big thing. Well, potentially when we look at it, we see that here's Russia, yes, a very big nation. Here's Belarus. Here's Kazakhstan. Here's the Ukraine. Sandwiched between the two. Can you see why Russia's fighting over it? Can you see why it's so important when it's got gas, it's got oil, and it's got a navy base there for it? What else are they talking about? What are the other states that could be prospective members of either union? What's that state? Country. Georgia. We already understand Russia's relationship with Georgia, don't we? So see how there could either be a union or it'll be by force. Take your pick. Syria. Let's keep moving along because there's lots to look at. What's happening in Syria? Well, this is an article from May 19 that said in the next 2 months, 10,000 people are going to die in Syria. Hang on. 298 died in the Malaysian aircraft? 10,000 in 2 months. Probably didn't even get on our headlines, did it? Just think about the focus of what's going on in the world. We don't necessarily hear things in proportion. Here's a summary. The conflict has displaced nearly half Syria's population. Why is the problem still ongoing? What is the one nation that is blocking resolutions, controls in Syria? Russia. Why? Why is Russia so interested in what's going on in Syria? They have their own ends. It's part of where they're going to come down, isn't it? I mean, we've seen what they're doing in Ukraine. We can see what they're doing in Georgia. You can see the potential of what can happen in Turkey. They can come down the other side as well, down from the Iran side. Remember Ezekiel 38 talks about Persia being on side? We'll come back to that in a sec. Give you another reason why Russia's so interested. How vital is Syria's Tartus port to Russia? Just how vital is it? Russia denies it and says, oh, look, it's not really important. We just go there to get fresh supplies and more water. Really? It's not what the Western nations think. Since Syria erupted into conflict last year, and yes, this is an older article, diplomats, spies and military strategists have struggled to work out what lies behind Moscow's staunch support of its Middle Eastern ally, the Syrian government of President Bashar al-Assad. What is it that lies behind it? Why do they keep backing this regime? Are they just controlling it? Just holding it out long enough until they can take control of the nation? What's their interests in it? Moscow says nothing. It's not a big priority, this port. Well, the view of the Western nations is it's a widely held belief that Moscow will do all it can to hold on to its only foothold in the Mediterranean. You can go on the article and see they have quite a substantial base there, able to service nuclear submarines. Currently, 12 warships there. Oh, it's not important, just getting supplies. Daniel chapter 11 says they'll come with many ships. From Syria, they have access, don't they, to Israel? Ready access down to Egypt and beyond. So whether they come down through Georgia, whether they come down through the waterways of the Black Sea and down through the Mediterranean, the stage is being set, isn't it? All right, what's happening with Iran? And I say Iran because Ezekiel 38 particularly says in verse 5, Persia, Ethiopia and Libya with this invasion. Verse 5 of Ezekiel chapter 38, Persia, Ethiopia and Libya. Daniel chapter 11 only tells us about Libya and Ethiopia. Ezekiel adds in that extra detail for us. What's the relationship between Russia and Iran? Yes, they're very supportive of one another. But Russia plans to build up to 8 new nuclear reactors in Iran, while the West is trying to shut them down. Well, that's helpful, isn't it, when they're going on an invasion with you? See what's going on in the world? We mentioned religion. This whole invasion that's been going on in Ukraine and the Crimea hasn't been without its religious flavour. If you can read this text here, I probably should have blown it up, sorry I didn't. The picture they're carrying, religious icon, but basically animosity, the headline says, and I haven't put where it's from, I'm sorry, it's slipped off. Animosity between the Russian Orthodox Church and the old Soviet Union seems to be forgotten in eastern Ukraine. They've got bigger issues to deal with, haven't they? They've forgotten the history, how they didn't agree, where symbols mix to create a fascinating fusion of identity. All right, and so the article goes on to say religion is a big part of it. Okay? Do we keep going? Let's see where my notes are. You might ask the question, does Russia have the money, before I go there? We've had a lot of people say to us, oh, Russia's broke. Russia couldn't do an invasion like that, their military's so behind. For the last 5 years, the Russian military has been turned around. There's a headline here from The Diplomat, so it's an Asian Pacific paper. Russian military spend soars. And here's just a phrase taken from it, it's a quote. Russia's military funding has jumped a whopping 92% since 2010. Okay, so what? What does that mean? That's just numbers. Well, let's read it all. With Russian involvement in Crimea raising diplomatic hackles, it's no secret who's stirring the pot in Europe. Russia is now the 3rd biggest defence spender in the world. They're spending more on defence than England, who's now in position number 4, and some of the other big, powerful European nations. Who's in front of them? The United States and China. Looking at Russia's military expansion plans for 2014, you'd think the Cold War had never ended. Quotation. Can we see the future of where the world's heading? The stage is being set for the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 11. We don't always see it in our papers. We don't always see it on the TV in Perth, on the other side of the world. It's happening. The opportunity, I guess, is for us to be aware of it, to be prepared for it when Christ's return comes. Now, you might see papers or magazines like this. Time magazine. This is September 2013, so last year. The world according to Vladimir Putin. And it says, America's weak and waffling. Russia's rich and resurgent. And its leader doesn't care what anybody thinks of him. The next one, just after the invasion of the Crimea, says, this isn't over. So did Time magazine read the Bible, or were they prophetic? Or did they just know there's some huge issues? It's not going to go away fast. it's boiling, and it's bubbling away to the point where Putin can then finally call himself a Tsar again. No longer a diplomatic, democratic type of country. Going back in time to those old ways. Who knows? The Bible doesn't tell us exactly how and what. Daniel chapter 11 gives us an awful lot of detail. We can only sit and watch and observe and prepare for what is ahead of us. There's always going to be an opposition. Ezekiel 38 talks about an opposition. We're one of those nations which Ezekiel 38 refers to as being in opposition to what Russia intends on doing in the future. It's a good position to be in. We can sit here and observe. But what do we need to do? Well, that's next week. We're going to have a look at this future kingdom, this new world that Ezekiel chapter 39 talks about, the ushering in of a new world order according to God's plan, bringing the world back to the way God originally intended it to be.